Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Prosek, and I'm here with Ken Costa. Ken has a storied career in the finance industry. He was the chairman of Lazard and also the head of EMEA for UBS. And Ken is the author of a book you must read about the trillion-dollar wealth transfer. Ken, I'm going to kick this off by saying I ran a panel yesterday about the risks to capitalism, and nothing came up about your topic. Tell us about the wealth transfer and why, and the risks to capitalism.
Well, thank you for that. The point about it is that it's massive. It's $100 trillion that is going to move from my generation to the next generation. And when that moves, you may say every generation will have a move of capital, but we've never seen anything of this size to a generation that are very empowered, technologically empowered. They're empowered in terms of social media and therefore their influence, and particularly empowered on the agenda that they are very clear that they want to see activated in their generation.
So you talk about the fact that the Zennials, which are the Zs and the Millennials, are actually quite angry at the Boomers, and the Boomers are the ones with the money, and the Zennials are going to get the money, and something bad may happen in between, and what is that?
Well, what I think is we can either have the clash of generations or we can have the cooperation of generations. Because at the moment, there is a big divide in that the boomers look to my generation and say, you've had the best of asset inflation, low interest rates, and we can't buy a flat anywhere in the world. We can't rent anywhere in the world. And therefore, you owe it to us to be able to see that that is transferred. At the same time, they are so empowered that if we don't argue strongly for capitalism in rewards, endeavor, in payments for taking risk, we could find that they would say, well, we want an entire new shape in terms of a much less competitive global environment. And that tension, in my view, will actually bring about some very serious consequences.
So they believe that the boomers created this capitalistic idea and they need to fix it. You talk about them moving into almost a more socialistic mindset. Why is that such a problem for capitalism?
Well, the problem for capitalism is if we don't engage and take up a very serious defense of the market economy, of why it is that the reward that needs to come from hard work endeavor, it gets lost in the translation, and all that happens is that governments get bigger, taxation has to rise, and there is no evidence to suggest that this is going to be beneficial to the economy as a whole. And that, I think, is the global risk, that if that continues, because bear in mind that the Zennials, or the millennials at one end...
The Zs and the millennials.
Yeah, but the millennials will be in the major corporations at the end of the decade, a majority.
Yes.
And they, therefore, will be in a very powerful position to make those changes. And we need to be sure that through the way in which, and the way I suggest we do it, is what I call I know we've had co-working and co-investing as something that people have understood, but what we haven't yet had is working on a co-destiny in terms of which the two generations are working together in terms of coaching, mentoring, working together, so that what you have, in the way I describe it, is the hindsight of my generation. We've been through inflation, we've been through recessions, and the insight of a new generation that are looking forward to create that foresight, i.e. that purpose for which capitalism is really intended.
But do you see that happening? I don't see it. I see a boomer, I'm an ex. Boomers are ex-CEOs wanting to stand their ground and want what they want, and they want the old ways, and the new generation's on the other side. So what is your call to action to this crowd? There are a lot of CEOs and business leaders here. What is and how do they do that?
Well, for the moment, it is a little cloud on the horizon.
Okay.
But it is growing. And what is growing is the desire that I think is essential. What I have detected is, don't you perceive this change? Because at the moment, the division is so extraordinary. So how can this work, to your question? Firstly, I think it has to be a much more serious taking account of that next generation within the corporations. And therefore, the establishment of a mission statement has to also be accompanied by a monitoring of that mission statement throughout the corporation, in which the generation is given a real meaningful buy-in to explaining how that works. On the other side of it, it is that our generation can help out in terms of mentoring, coaching, co-investing, all the co-words of, co-destiny means working together, co-living, for a generation that is looking very differently at assets. My generation wanted to own everything. The new generation is quite happy to be asset light.
Yes.
And therefore we're seeing these massive changes occurring worldwide. And they are occurring now. It's not just 100 trillion that's going to be given over the next 10 years. In the UK, the Bank of Mum and Dad, which we know about, is giving the equity to the next generation to own their houses, to be able to get onto the ladder, is the largest provider of equity capital in the housing market.
So not to blow the whole book, but Ken's a very interesting person, and this call to action came from a very interesting story where he was asked to mediate during the Occupy Wall Street, Occupy movement. Tell everybody just the story quickly about how did you get involved in this topic and what was your wake-up call?
Sure, the wake-up call was when the Occupy movement took over the front of the London Stock Exchange and indeed St. Paul's Cathedral and had the cathedral closed. And I was asked to mediate between the people that were there and the city fathers.
Why you? Why were you asked?
Well, I was supposed to, I think I was a banker at the time, and I had already written a commentary on why the capitalism had broken its moral moorings. And the thing that struck me more than anything else was talking to some of those, which I've now called the Xennial generation, talking to them made it very clear to me with a simple comment: if this is so good, why isn't it working for us? Why are you merely skimming the last years without it coming down, supposedly trickling down, but also to our generation? And I then realized that we have to be much more active and much more committed to working together. Otherwise, the divisions within the society would simply break us up.
So that was a little while ago. What's been your journey since then? How are you trying to wake people up? Because again, at this conference, we're talking about AI and all these other disruptors, but no one's talking about this generational divide.
Well, no one's talking about it yet.
Okay.
And I think it's great that we're the ones that are sort of leading the way, Jen. But I
We're
think
breaking the news here on the stage.
I think that it is going to, it's a seismic change that is occurring. And anybody who is not perceiving it hasn't worked within any of the organizations. Because the millennial mind, the Xennial mind, thinks very differently. And they don't think that we respect them enough. They don't think that we put weight on their judgments. We merely tolerate them, thinking that they're tech geeks and we're sort of living in an analog age. But actually, we now need to be very active in terms of working in our business schools, right the way through the ways in which generations are being looked after within corporations, almost by generation. Because, we used to have feedback as the way in which you made an assessment of someone's performance. What they want now is feed forward.
Yes.
Be able to look forward. What is changing? Because they don't fear change, they embrace it. We're talking about AI and the threats of quantum computing, and they're embracing it, and we should be able to learn together how it is that we can harness this for to create the purpose for which the capitalist system really does exist, which is to spread widely the benefits of the market economy.
So if that $1 trillion of wealth transfers to the Xennials and we don't do something, what's going to happen? What could happen?
Well, I think what could happen is that we would find immediately a view growing that actually we have to increase taxations enormously to be able to cover what are thought to be, and are rightly, the important agenda items, the planet, ESG, sustainability, by the generation, and therefore we will get to a stage of even worse than we need now. And I think that's going to lead to a great deal of instability if in fact we don't actually get the message across. And that's an active, you, me, everyone here, actively being prepared to roll up sleeves and ask, take opinions seriously.
Yes.
Deal with them in a sort of constructive way. draw them into the decision making of all the major corporations.
Okay, go back to your days as chairman of Lazard. If it was now, I'm a mini CEO, you were a big CEO. Give, like, practically, you talked about rolling up your sleeves. What would you have done as a chairman or CEO? Give me 3 or 4 things you'd do to engage these two generations.
I think the first thing would be the first thing and the most important would be to bring them together, because at the moment they are not. They're separated by silos in the different way they're talking. Secondly, to have somebody there who is facilitating the conversation so that it's not just a sort of individual chat, because you both catch it and you teach it.
Yes.
That's caught and taught at the first level. I think in the second, it is to enable them to find a meaningful way of being able to be involved in the actual day-to-day decision-making of the corporation on the basis of looking forward rather than looking backwards. So that would be the second that I would see. And I would add a reward or a compensation for the way in which people are cooperating together.
Yeah.
So that the incentive is to work together.
Yes. We only have a few minutes left, but again, Ken is a very interesting person. We talk about authentic leadership now. We talk about empathetic leadership. Ken is a man of God, and I think your spirituality has also helped you bring people together. Tell everybody about how spirituality and your, faithful side has helped you lead with empathy.
Well, I think that it's an important part. I simply put it this way, that my workstation is also my worship station, because I think God created us all to be productive, to work hard, to see the rewards, and to share the rewards that we have. So that whole space for faith in the workplace is, I think, very important. And if you come to a place like Saudi Arabia, it goes without saying. If you're in the UK or the US or elsewhere, ground needs to be fought for. But at the end of the day, everybody is wanting a purpose for which they are working. And I've found it personally in that there was space for faith in what I was doing, because I believe God was at work wherever we are, whether it's in the workplace or in a church or in our homes, in our relationships.
What an important message. Last thing I'll ask, because you mentioned we are in Saudi Arabia, is there a difference in your view between the Zennials in this country or in the Middle East or emerging markets versus London and New York?
Well, absolutely. Firstly, in absolute terms, 70% of this nation is under the age of 34.
Yeah.
And His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is a millennial prince.
This
and
is true.
Therefore, he reflects in every way the aspirations of another generation. Now, I wish all our governments were as forward-looking, as prepared to reflect the generational input that makes the difference for the future in terms of technology, in terms of change, and the willingness to embrace rather than to resist change.
So we are very excited about the Zennials in Saudi Arabia. Anyway, this is a book you all need to have. Ken Costa, thanks so much for the chat.
Thank you so much.
Okay.